Welcome to the Real CP Show. I'm your host, CP. And today's topic, Southport, North Carolina, mass shouting by this Anglo male at this known restaurant off the water, fixing epidemic levels of on white criminality should be classified as a national crisis. But of course, you have some personnel that be like, what are you talking about? It should be classified as a national crisis. Let's see for a second. Now, where are those same type people that like to minimize white on white criminality, white on white fatigue, but be jumping up and down talking about black on black crime, black on black crime, black on black crime? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? You know what I'm talking about? No. Black on black crime. What black on black crime? What about black on black crime? We must talk about black on black crime, black on black crime. But at the same time, when you start reading these kind of stories over and over and over and over and over again, they're like this. Right? On this situation. So in this scenario, where again, I like to be able to do these as timepiece purposes. Today is October the 2nd, 2025. Because in this system of supremacy, which is the most awesome mental manipulation force that's ever existed, they know that there are quite a number of personnel within various parts of America, because the premise is about keeping chaos going on, keeping people confused, keeping people off balances, right? So with so much chaos going on, that makes numbers of people have short-term memories about things. And I'm not talking about health-related situations. So for me, it is essential to have these things as a timepiece purpose of these black on black, this white on white criminality, white on white criminality. Oh, don't get it confused. We can talk about brown on brown criminality and yellow upon yellow criminality and tan upon tan criminality. Oh, I've done various podcasts on that as well on the Real CP Show podcast. So don't get stuff confused. I'm just relaying to this situation because the number one people who like to very much say black on black crime, black on black crime, black on black crime is certain ones within the Panamese culture. Right? Oh, there's some Anglo-adjacent ones and some Black American cosplaying ones. Who know they are? And there's some white Hispanicism. And there's some white stereotype version what we think is Asians. You like, which Asian you talking about? Because Iran is an Asian country. Iraq is an Asian country. Certain parts of Russia is an Asian country. You see how that game goes, right? But we're going to talk about that topic today. So let me go ahead. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to have a little bit of history, too, on the situation related to Wilmington, North Carolina, that still to this day, 2025, how many people still have not heard about this certain racism, terrorism, massacre of many type Black Americans in Wilmington? Not because they were fleeing from across the Pacific Ocean somewhere or in a certain big old giant continent on certain places, right? Not talking about some of the good people, by the way, brothers and sisters there. I'm not talking about fleeing from certain parts of some of the beautiful Caribbean islands. Again, I'm not talking about some of the good, humble brothers and sisters from the beautiful islands of the Caribbean, right? But in this system of supremacy, they only allow a certain amount of ones to go through the cracks to be able to arrive and flee to America. They want more of the coons to come over here, and that's what they definitely most have. So let me go ahead and share my screen on this situation to go ahead and start. Which one I want to start first? Okay, let me just do this one. All right, make sure you can see this. Oh, let me get that off the screen here. Give me a second. Okay, here we go. Make sure you can see that. All right. Okay. So, gunman, this Anglo gunman, fires from a boat into, because I'm watching certain words, because you know certain words that they go to all that algorithm is thrown off certain words. So this particular Anglo gunman fires from a boat into a North Carolina restaurant, unaliving 3 and wounding 5 others, which primarily are numbers of personnel within the Panamese culture under Angloism. Where's all that white on white crime, white on white crime, white on white fatigue, white on white fatigue? Nope. You see how that game goes, right? See how it goes. So let me go and read a little bit of this. The brief, this Anglo male is charged with unaliving 3 people and wounding 5 others, primarily Anglonism, after shooting from a boat into a North Carolina restaurant. North Carolina restaurant. This enforcement personnel said 8 people were shot when the violence, white on white crime, white on white crime, white on white crime, white on white violence, erupted around 9:30 p.m. Saturday. The suspect, Nigel Max Edge, is known to local enforcement. Yes, a troublemaker. But black on black crime, black on black crime, black on black crime, right? The Anglo suspect has been charged after reportedly opening fires from a boat into the waterfront restaurant in North Carolina, unaliving 3 people and wounding 5 others Saturday night. Today is October the 2nd, 2025, so this is only a few days ago. The shooting erupted around 9:30 p.m. Saturday near a popular stretch of bars and restaurants on Southport, North Carolina's waterfront, in a historic port town about 30 miles of Wilmington. 30 miles is nothing from Wilmington, North Carolina to Southport, North Carolina. South Carolina was also some of the headquarters of enslavement of blacks. Like many other states or colonies up and down that northeast side, which is minimized, along with various parts of the southern states. Now, no other culture ever in America has been enslaved like Black Americans, right? But remember, Black Americans are lazy. And there are numerous other Black Americans who were not put in enslavement, right? But again, Black Americans supposed to be lazy, right? Please go to Haiti if you want to play that game, right? Who is the suspect? Well, we know Nigel, the Anglo male Max Edge, 40, was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, 5 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and 5 counts of assault with a deadly weapon in connection with the shooting at the American Fish Company restaurant. The city's public information officer confirmed whatever it is on that part. Roughly half an hour after the shooting, a U.S. Coast Guard crew spotted a person matching the suspect's description. Another angry Anglo-type male, the one applies to, pulling a boat from the water at a public ramp on Oak Island. The person was detained. This Anglo male person was detained and turned over to the Southport enforcement for questioning. The weapon used was an assault rifle, although enforcement didn't specify what kind. Enforcement said the suspect is known to local authorities as frequently hung out on our pier. Edge has also filed lawsuits against the town and enforcement department over the past few years. This particular personnel said Edge, whilst minimizing, had just minor contacts with enforcement in the past. See, that's that minimizing, right? Now, if it's a Black person that did this, There is no minimizing, but nothing significant in its past. You see how that nonsensical snail crap minimizing goes. Because again, if this is Black American male did this, there is no minimizing, which would give us any indication that he was capable of such horror. As if many of these mass shootings are done by personnel that look like that they were just going to do all kind of stuff. No, many of them by personnel that how many of their friends and family members, co-workers, etc. like, well, we didn't know that person was like that. They didn't act like that. Sometimes some of them were strange looking, strange how they acted, but we never thought that. So it goes, right? We understand this suspect identifies as a combat veteran. He self-identifies injured in the line of duty is what he's saying. He suffers from PTSD. We've got to watch that wording. It's an insult to the numbers of personnel who do truly suffer from PTSD. It's like when somebody throws out the little generic terminology, surface level, oh, mental illness. Isn't it unfunny? Well, all this black pain that's been going on toward Black Americans for centuries, right? Who are and should be the personnel say, golly, millions of Black Americans suffer from black pain. And it should be reparations for free counseling anywhere in America for free. That's a form of reparations, by the way, as well. Another topic in itself. I make this point. The throwing out of mental illness is insulting, because what the people who actually do suffer from mental illness is being minimized. But the same, especially now, even more within more white on white crime, you got people love trying to minimize that and throwing, well, some people say suffer from mental illness, and it's nonsense, demonic King Kong poop of excuses. It's been accepted too many times. Because again, if it was Black Americans that was doing this left and right, there is no such thing as, that Black man, that Black woman suffering mental illness. They don't want to hear that. Said that little disgusting tactic goes. Ain't talking about PTSD. I forget. There's a thing called, I don't know if anybody has heard about this, or actually the terminology came up with. If it's the first time, fine. If it's not, it's not. I call this racial racism PTSD. That how many times this still happens to numbers of Black Americans in certain parts of the service. Oh, you still got people that don't want to talk about that still. Oh, it's a real thing. Racial racism, PTSD. It's a real thing. And so people that know, right? In the out the service, racial racism, PTSD is a real thing toward Black Americans. I'm not talking about coons and salots and gullibles. Well, we don't know. Officials didn't release a specific motive, but they said the shooting was highly premeditated and targeted. The victims who were unalive have not been identified, which is still regards going to be primary Anglo personnel. In that area of Southport, the primary demographic is white. Gigantically primary. In that little restaurant, that little city town you want to call it's only a few thousand. And those that particular part is only a few thousand, and it's made up of primarily Anglo personnel in this town. So it is primarily going to be the victims who are going to be Anglo, and unfortunately another white on white criminality. That's going to be again minimized on situations on that type of situation, right? So let me stop this right here. Let me stop that here. Let me show this. Will this make more Anglo males be looked at with hesitation walking down the street? Nope. But we will just continue to be like Black on Black criminality and Black on Black criminality mantra, right? You see how that goes. But at the same time, again, if you start talking about white on white crime, white on white crime, white on white crime. What are we going to do about that? This is what you have certain ones within certain parts of its culture, and you got some coons and sellouts within certain parts. Black Americanism, one applies to, right?
Nothing. I know nothing. I know nothing.
Yes, that is what a sectionality within certain parts of its culture will do. They know nothing. Right now, if it's black male doing something, oh my goodness, what are we going to do about this black on black crime, black on black crime, black on black crime? And unfortunately, there are millions within American Blackism that allows certain numbers of non-small percentage of personnel within predominant culture to keep playing this little silly tactic. Oh, don't get it confused. Again, there are some black adjacent hotter fleers that got the nerve to talk about black Americans and how many of them have fled from places that look like them. The nerve. And again, you got some ones that try to hide under people of color, non-black, and minority playing the little tactics, right? But they jump in, they black when they want to be black, right? And they jump back out and then talking about their own tribalism, or if they're from this particular island or this particular place. You get the game on that part, right? Don't get it confused. Oh, there's some hatred come from different directions toward black Americans, right? As if black Americans been messing over people left and right. What the nerve. But there's a lot of jealousy toward black Americans, right? But they love trying to sit there and try to fragment a certain section of black Americanism and try to act like that's the overall amount of black Americanism. I don't think so. Black Americans collectively do not do criminality. Right? But that's the whole TV. Watch the games. So let me go ahead and share my screen again. So which one? Oh, let me go ahead and play this particular video here.
The North Carolina restaurant and bar at the center of a deadly shooting over the weekend is closed indefinitely. That's according to a Facebook post from the American Fish Company in Southport, which is a historic port town just south of Wilmington. Police say 40-year-old Nigel Edge opened fire from a boat, killing 3 people and seriously injuring at least 5 others on Saturday night. He is expected to appear for his first court appearance later today on multiple charges, including murder. NBC News national correspondent Aaron Gilchrist joins us now from outside of the county courthouse. Aaron, officials are calling this a, quote, highly premeditated attack. What else?
But you, again, the minimizing to make sure it's not framed of, oh my goodness, what are we going to do about this white on white crime, right? See how it goes, right? See how they do stuff like this.
What are we learning about the suspect and also the victims?
Well, Ellison, as you said, the suspect, Nigel Edge, will appear in court here this afternoon. He's expected to be charged with first-degree murder, 3 counts of that, as well as attempted first-degree murder, 5 counts of that, and several other charges as well. This goes back to around 9:30 Saturday night when witnesses tell us just before then they saw a boat in the water just off the back deck of that restaurant that you referenced here, a bar really, and folks were there listening to music as they had come accustomed to doing on a Saturday night. The boat was the unusual part, witnesses told us. You didn't usually see boats parked near that back deck. After a couple of hours, apparently, according to witnesses, Nigel Edge picked up that assault-style rifle that investigators told us about and started shooting into the restaurant where it was crowded with 60 to 80 people, we understand.
And here's the thing about it. When you keep hearing people talking about, oh my goodness, the assault-style weapon, who are the primary people that you keep hearing again and again and again and again doing these mass shootings? Numbers of personnel males within the predominant culture. But again, you got people that want to play silly and act like they don't see it. Or they see it. The problem is that this system knows it's not enough American blacks to sit there and call this hypocrisy out. They know it's not enough black political figures to say, hey, man, what are we going to do about this white on white crime? Because various types of black political factions are being infiltrated by black adjacent harder fleers. And they're being allowed to come over to America and infiltrate the political structures more and more as a bufferness against black Americans. Oh, the game is, well, it's a rough game. And the system knows it's not enough black Americans who see through this game with extremely small exceptions.
As we noted, 5 people were seriously injured there, some of them critically. 3 people were killed as well. I want you to hear from one of the witnesses we spoke to yesterday about what he saw when that gunfire started inside the bar.
And then I turned around and saw people just laying everywhere. They were shot. One person had been shot in the head that passed, and then another one shot in the elbow, was shattered, and a couple of friends of mine were grazed. To see the carnage, you never get that out of your head.
I bet you they're not going to talk about white on white crime, white on white crime. What are we going to do about this white on white crime? What are we going to do about this white on white fatigue? And how many people and somewhere in those areas have some animosity toward black Americans? How many of them were talking about, they were talking about black Americans before this situation happened? How many of them were doing that? Oh, black people always talking about race, as if racial racism, terrorism has ever stopped happening toward black Americans for centuries in various sections of Americanism. See, black Americans are the only beautiful black skin type people that have never fled to other countries like that. See, there's nothing wrong with going to some other places for opportunities, like some people come to opportunity to America. Nothing wrong with that. This is globalness. But it's a problem when you have some black adjacent harder fleers that run from their origins, that run from the great continent of Africa, that flee from the numbers of the beautiful islands of the Caribbean. Again, I'm not talking about some of the good brothers and sisters that arrive to America. That's going to be a very small percentage, by the way, because again, the system will not allow a large percentage of personnel from various sections of Africa, black skin version, or from certain sections of the beautiful Caribbean islands. They're not going to allow a lot of black skinned ones to come to America of any percentage, large percentage, that's about sitting there getting together with black Americans to come together and fight against racial racism. Now, black Americans do not need personnel to fight. Black Americans have been doing that for centuries. And too many times people arrive to America soaking up the benefits off of black pain that they could fix in their own previous countries, etc. Of corruption, of doing numbers of their own people wrong. I've relayed over various podcasts on the Real CP show on that also.
Now, obviously, the big question now is why. We know that investigators have been able to develop enough information. They were able to talk to Mr. Edge, and they say that this was a premeditated attack on that bar. They didn't really give us much detail about what brings them to that conclusion, although we do expect to learn more about that in that court hearing set for this afternoon. As we noted, investigators seem to indicate that they've had at least some conversation with Nigel Edge. They say that he self-identifies as a combat veteran and that he self-identified as someone who suffers from PTSD.
And you said what I said earlier. You cannot get food for the ones, the very few that ain't gonna be fooled by that. You got to watch it, because see, in this supremacist system, they'll sit there and put the orders out. Hey, put this out there, put this out there. If you can try to minimize it, we'll throw out there, well, he's a combat veteran. As freaking if there's never been any racial racism, hatred ones that have been combat veterans. We're just going to pretend that less than 100 years ago, the service was still segregated. We're just going to damn pretend that there's no numbers of Anglo politicians who make sure to keep segregation in the service alive. We're just going to pretend there was no Anglo politicians that were pro-segregation. We're just going to pretend that there was no Klan type members that were still in the various sections of the service then, and how many now? See, the problem is, there's not enough people to talk to numbers of Black Americans that's in the service that'll tell them what's still going on. Or numbers of Black Americans that were in the service not a long time ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, one that's still been around, not that many Vietnam veterans, Korean veterans. You get the point, right? That tells them, because that's some coons and sellouts, but the real ones tell them, yeah, the Vietnam War, yeah, there was racism still going on toward Black Americans. I said Korean War, that was in the 50s. Not that many left. But again, I myself, I had actually talked to a Black American veteran a few years ago. Something I can't recall because that was so long ago. But he was talking about he was in a pseudo-segregated unit in the Korean War. Even though the military was supposed to be desegregated in 1947, 1948, Korean War was in the 50s, and he was still telling me that, yeah, he still was in basically a pseudo-segregated unit. And again, some years later, Vietnam War started up. And there's certainly numbers of Black Vietnam veterans that'll tell you, oh man, many times they're on the front lines on that. But remember, Black American males, right, are anti-service, right? Anti-military, anti-law enforcement. Right. But again, they make sure they don't want to talk about the racial racism that's still happening in certain sections of the service. They don't want to tell you about what's still going on in certain parts of enforcement with racial racism still toward Black Americans. They don't want to still act like that racial profile still not going on by various bad seeds. So that game goes. It's a disgusting game, but they know it's allowed by quite a number within American Blackism. They know it. Right? This, to me, I know it's an offensive thing because too many Black Americans have lost their lives over centuries of fighting for this country. And still, when they came back home, or ones that were still here, after the Vietnam War and stuff like that. 21st century, 2025, because it's 2025. Numbers of Black folks serving the service. And they'll sit there and tell you that they experience racial racism, hatred still. 2025. Right? But they know it's not enough Black Americans to talk about those kind of stories. Right? So then when somebody try to throw in a little sneaky little demonic piece of King Kong, yet, well, he's a combat veteran. What that's supposed to mean? There are Klan members that can be combat veterans. What are you talking about?
We do know that he served in the Marine Corps and was separated from the Marine Corps more than a decade ago, Ellison.
And here's the thing about it, for people don't know. For the people don't know, you look up the Montford Point Marines. Montford Point Marines. There was a Black military personnel that was still in segregation. The Montford Point Marines. That was less than 100 years ago. So you got to watch people when they start talking about, oh, that personnel was in the military. What the hell that got to do anything? Again, there's still racial racism going on in certain parts of the service. There are surveys on that right now. People can look it up. Surveys on that.
All right. NBC's Aaron Gilchrist in North Carolina. Thank you.
That's enough of that. I don't want to play more of that. That's tiring on that. It's tiring. Because again, the minimum, and you see how they are, and you watch how there's like they still kind of wearing these little gloves, like these little offhanded kind of gloves, like, well, we got to make sure we don't talk a certain way. It's like they still going around the bush to not look at this as we have a problem on white criminality. What are we going to do about this now, right? Let's hear from the great Deputy Bonnie Fife from the great Andy Griffin Show.
I say this calls for action, and now, nip it in the bud.
Yes, the great Bonnie Fife, Deputy Sheriff from Mayberry. Tell them again what we need to do about this national crisis of white criminality, white fatigue. What do we have to do about this?
I say this calls for action, and now, nip it in the bud.
Yes. But again, you have certain ones within certain parts of Panama's culture that'll be doing like this, and some codes and some sellouts too. But we talking about realistic now. Numbers of personnel within various sections of Panama's culture, with very few exceptions in there as well. This is what they be doing when they sit there and see this white on white crime criminality happening consistently again. This is what numbers of them do.
Nothing. I know nothing. I know nothing.
Yes. Let me sit there. What I want to show you here. Let me see if I what I want to show here. Actually, I'm almost finished. Actually, this is what I want to show. We're talking about history. But before I do that, before I show that, they'll tell numbers of Black Americans, and unfortunately, because it's so much generational Black pain, they tell numbers of American Blacks, man, get over the past, as if the past is not still happening now, as if our brains differentiate what's happening generationally within our DNAs, right? Of Black pain, 1600s, certain parts of the 1500s, depending. But we're talking about primarily, let's go to the 1600s, where you're talking about slave codes, not slave codes toward numbers of personnel because they were from Africa, not because they're from certain parts of the Caribbean, right? But because they what became Black Americans. 1700s. Still slave code still going on within America. And you got some fools that try to act like that Black Americans are lazy. The nerve. And you got some of these Black adjacent runners or hotters that run from places that look like them. Because collectively, they can't get stuff situated in their own countries. And again, I'm talking about some of the good brothers and sisters. Those are very small. They're very small. Because collectively, those are the ones that come over as coons and sellouts, are primarily ones that are coons and sellouts. They're over in America, Black adjacent hotters, with very small exceptions to them. And those are the ones supremacy allows to come to America to have a hatred for Black Americans, because Black Americans don't flee to other countries like that, right? And they certainly are not going to other countries or some beautiful Caribbean islands. I'm giving an example, and go over there and have podcasts and talking all crazy on social media about numbers of Caribbeans. What is your problem? Black Americans over there in the beautiful Caribbean, they're making things happen and getting these businesses and getting all this education more over there. Are they going to various parts of Africa and setting up more businesses and going on talking about, they're more educated than numbers of people from various parts of Africa? And what's the problem? Why y'all sitting there allowing these pseudo third and fourth way colonization by various other cultures? What is our problem? What's going on with this Pan-Africanism? Why is that not stopping this invasion of third and fourth way colonization over there? What is going on over there? Because Black Americans are not built to be sitting there insulting people in their own countries like that. But the opposite is true by certain black skin runner hiders that have come from certain sections of Africa, that have come from certain beautiful islands. I'm talking to what applies to. Because it's only a small amount of brothers and sisters who come from those places that still are humble, who know the truth as well, that they have some super coons and some sellers among their own. Right? I make this point. See, people won't tell people forget about this history. Whoa, you say what now? Oh. So, they better not tell people to forget about this bad poster board. You better not. Even though that's way across the Atlantic Ocean, way across there. Right? But again, you better not tell people forget about this. When you got however number of schools that are going to places, those concentration camps, or the remnants of those concentration camps in various places, and make sure they better not forget that they make sure the kids are indoctrinated to make sure you better not forget what that bad poster board man did to certain type people, right? You better not. Even though there's various other people that were put in those concentration camps. No. We don't care what you say. You better make sure we are the primary people that you better talk about that this bad man did to numbers of our people. That's what you better make sure you better not forget. And even Americanism, how many of these museums relating to this type of you better not forget that this happened, right? In America right now. And how many people are getting reparations across that Pacific Atlantic Ocean and certain places that are getting reparations of taxpayers' money going toward them for something that had nothing to do with Black Americans. Well, Black Americans talking about reparations for centuries of Black pain that predates the 1/8 Holocaust, and what about the various parts of African Holocaust that predates 1/8 Holocaust in various sections of Europe? Boy, I'm telling the nerve. But the Black American Holocaust that's been going for centuries, we start talking about what are they going to do for the correction of Black American pain that's been going for centuries. Huh? What are you going to do about that, right? What are you going to do about that? This is what they do. They be like, what are you talking about? We ain't got anything to do with that. We ain't got anything to do with that. But they better not sit there and say anything about you ain't got anything to do that your taxpayers' money going to various people across the Atlantic Ocean, and how numbers of survivors, how parts of America they give reparations right now. You better not say you don't want your taxpayers' money going toward that. You better not sit there and say, I don't want my taxpayers' money going to what we call Native Americans, whatever that's supposed to mean. Because also Black natives, you still got people act like it's not, right? Even though it's been proven to the people who know, right, that Black Americans are put in some kind of little generic black box and stuff like that. Just like even right now in the 21st century, you still got numbers of Black Americans, about a million, with very few exceptions, that are still allow people to put Black Americans collectively in some type of minority, people of color, marginalized communities, underutilized communities, right? Communities of color, BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous people of color. It's disgusting tactic that millions of American Blacks still allow people to put them in. Nobody will allow themselves to be put in certain boxes like Black Americans by the millions, with very few exceptions. Nobody. They're not playing that, right? So you get the point about you better not tell some people forget about history on this bad man. And you better not tell some other people about ones from some other countries about some bad parts of their history that they got away from to come to America. Yeah, better not tell them to forget about anything parts of history. But somebody when Black America's talking about centuries of Black pain, we ain't got anything to do with that. So let me go ahead, and this is probably the last thing or two I'm going to show. Let me share my screen. I say a little bit of history. There are quite a number of people who still have not heard about this right here. Now, again, to some of the good brothers and sisters that are not Black Americans, that come from certain sections of Africa or certain parts of the Caribbean, and they don't know, but they're like, hey, you know what? They're open to learning things, and they have humility to know that many wouldn't be in America without Black Americans. Credit given to them, but those are very small. And even for many other cultures and backgrounds, many other cultures and backgrounds who have no clue, idea of real Black American history, have no clue of true American history. Right? Well, Black folks are lazy, but nobody has went through centuries of Black pain like Black Americans and still get no reparations. The 1600s, the 1700s, the 1800s, and even going to various sections of the 1900s, the three largest populations in America, what we call whites, whatever that's supposed to mean, because you have Anglo-adjacent ones, that's a whole different topic in itself. You have what we call Native Americans, again, whatever that's supposed to mean, because you're Anglo-Native Americans. Many of them put themselves, the ones it applies to, put their names on certain rolls to $2.50, $5, and became Native Americans, the ones it applies to, right? That's the whole game in itself about how we call Native Americans getting that reparations, the ones it applies to. But numbers of Black Native that have been putting paperwork in on certain type of what we call Native tribes have had to be going through jumping all over hoops. You see the game of that part of it? You see how that goes. So this right here. But they still get reparations, right? And 9,000% people ain't questioning that. Wait a minute, why would we call Native Americans get reparations? Because for the people who know, because most people don't know, Trail of Tears, which is the poster board of saying, look what the white man took our land. The white man took our land. The white man took our land. The white man removed us and all this kind of stuff like that. And no one ain't telling how Native Americans to shut up with that. They ain't got anything to do with me. They ain't got anything to do with me. Right? I'm just saying, right? Come on, various sections of the Angloism. You don't hear them saying, I ain't got anything to do with that. But how many saying when you bring up Black American reparations, lineage-based, I ain't got anything to do with that. They saying that real quick about that part, but not about Native Americans, what we call supposed Native Americans. They ain't sitting there saying, hey, man, we ain't got anything to do with that. We ain't got anything to do with Trail of Tears. We didn't remove you. I didn't remove you from no land or reservation. I ain't got anything to do with that. Nope, because they're scared. But some dealing with American Black reparations, they want to play crazy. I ain't got anything to do with that. The nerve of some people. So Wilmington, make sure you can see that. Wilmington, 1898, the unsuppressed history of a basically racism, terrorism massacre. Didn't happen to nobody else. Oh, the three largest populations, 1700s, well, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, going to the 1900s, were again white, whatever that's supposed to mean, Anglo-adjacent, Native Americans, again, whatever that's supposed to mean, because there was Anglo-Indians that put themselves on certain roads, became Native Americans, the ones applies to, and Black Americans. Those are the only three largest populations for centuries in America. That was it. And we start getting to the late 20th century, the system supremacists start saying, okay, after the civil rights, the last civil rights apex 1960s, we got to do something about these Black American Negroes. They getting out of hand. They start allowing just a little bit here and there, a little bit of some Black adjacent fleers and hotters to start coming over to America, pieces at a time. And now in the 21st century, it is ablaze. A little bit more, still not a lot whatsoever. It's like a chihuahua. You got a lot of black adjacent hotter fleers. When you look at their demographics as a whole, they make up a smattering of piece of the population of America. But they got the amount of chihuahuas having the rampantness to have the nerve to talk about black Americans. They make up only a smattering of black skin, should we say, population in America. The nerve. But they're being allowed to talk that crispy, demonic, King Kong breath type of nonsense toward black Americans, with very few exceptions who are saying they're not going to have that nonsense. They sit there and go back off on them and let them know who y'all think y'all are doing supplies to. Wilmington, 1898, the unsuppressed history of, again, racial racism, anti-American black massacre. Many people still have not heard about this right here. The Wilmington 1898 massacre against black Americans. It was, make sure you can see this. I'm not gonna read a lot of this. Just a little bit of it. It was 1898 in the port city. So I'll make sure my mute is off. Okay. It was 1898 in the port city of Wilmington, North Carolina, was bustling with former slaves. You got to watch that word. See, that's some gaslighting terminology, because it's also made to try to make seem like to try to get people to look at black Americans as y'all just slaves. You mean by that? Of course, millions of American blacks are slaves. So the hell what? American blacks still built this country. Apparently, the terminology of slaves didn't have anything to do with laziness, apparently, because American blacks built this country from scratch of many places, left and right, more than anybody else besides certain ones within the predominant culture. And there were numbers of black Americans who were not slaves that were doing their thing as well. So try again. But isn't it funny how there are numbers of Anglo slaves, right? There are numbers of people within various sections of Europe that were sitting there enslaving whites. Right? See how that goes? That don't make them feel powerlessness. No, but that was a form of white on white slavery, right? Even we're here talking about people trying to play little slick ass demonic tactics. What about the Irish slaves? Go to hell. There is no such thing as Irish slavery in America. In the 1600s, that wouldn't even been a conversation about numbers of Irish people in America. So stop. And go to hell with that game. And how many numbers of Irish person it once applies to also grabbed up a few type of black American slaves? Huh? They don't talk about that part. Look at the draft riots that happened in, I think, 1800s, where it was caused by certain numbers of Irish that wanted to be Anglo so bad. And they sit there and were so jealous that certain numbers of Anglos did not want to accept them as Anglo. And now when going to the 20th century, the numbers within certain Irishism were told, the ones who know they are, if you want to be honorary Anglos, you've got to sit there and show black Americans hatred. And they did, numbers of them, the ones who did it. But the draft riots, take a look at that and see again the numbers of Irish personnel, the ones applies to Irish Anglos who committed heinousness toward black Americans. And that's still a little known history that's still not talked about enough. So this right here, okay, now I'm just going to just talk about this before I close it out. It was 1898, and the port city of Wilmington, North Carolina, was bustling with former slaves, black Americans. And there was no other black Americans who weren't slaves. And black Americans so lazy, how can they build this country up from scratch and take care of their own stuff and build in black towns if they were so lazy? Try again. And how many of those Anglos were super piss poor? Super piss poor. And how many had super unsanitary practices left and right? Ugh. And some people have a nerve talking about Black America. They slaves. Well, Black America. That don't do a damn thing to real, I think of Black America. Say, so hell what? American blacks still built this country from scratch. Try again. They competed with white citizens for jobs as blacksmiths and carpenters. That sounds lazy. Doctors and lawyers. Wait a minute now. You mean there were black American doctors and lawyers? Yes. Yes, it was. The city's population was majority black citizens. And I consistently make sure to try to add Black Americans. When you say black in general without no context, people love playing little silly little slide games, right? Because that could be some black adjacent how to tell us they could be trying to put in there, even though 1898, it wouldn't even be measurable even having the nerve to talk about some black adjacent runner hodders in America. Because you talking about not only they would have been not barely a peep on the radar in 1898, black adjacent hodder tellers, right? But I would like to make sure I add the word Black American citizens. Just like you had people they differentiate with the tribalism, right? Or the country of origin, wherever it is, Black Americans definitely start doing that more too. And the nerve, some people get mad at some the Black Americans that make to delineate from black adjacent tellers who ran, but make sure they dip in when they want to say black, when they try to get some benefits, but dip out when black pain is going on. The nerve. So Black American citizens and their wealth and influence were growing. Let me say it again. Black American citizens and their wealth and influence were growing. They bought property in open businesses, invested in banks, and worked as police officers. They held jobs in government, won elections to public office, including the U.S. House of Representatives, and organized along the working class white neighbors to create a political movement known as fusion, in which some white populists and Black Americans and some white Republicans formed joint electoral tickets on shared priorities. Black American men served on the board of aldermen, as city treasurer, city jailer, city coroner, 10 of Wilmington, North Carolina. 26 police were Black Americans. But Black Americans are lazy, right? But watch this. But Black American men's success threatened the power of local white elite. It wasn't just local white elite. It was some piss poor ones also within certain Anglo-whiteism as well. Let's not minimize that. So white men, once applies to, mounted the first successful coup d'etat in U.S. history. Wait a minute now. What do you mean by that? Wielding intimidation, racist, anti-American black propaganda, beatings, and murder to drive Black American people out of office, out of business, and out of town. An unknown number were murdered during what is now called the 1898 Wilmington Massacre, a series of terrible events that would leave the city forever changed. And still to this date, October the 2nd, 2025, you still have quite a number of people who've never heard of the 1898 Wilmington anti-Black American racial terrorism massacre. And this is why it's also an abomination of insultingness of Black Americans' ancestors who have passed on, who have been fighting to be treated as equals in a lot of racism and racial racism, hatred, and various sections of Americanism. And you got these Black adjacent donkey turd hodders, rodders that fled their countries, that look like them instead of building up their places. They fled. And they come over here with that tribalism or certain type of islandism. Again, I'm talking about some of the good brothers and sisters who know who they are. So we're not going to play that little silly tactic. Right? And how many do not know about this? And have the nerve to talk about Black Americans are lazy when they can't even sit there and get their own countries in check with corruption and police brutality in their own countries. right? Self-hatred among their number of people. The nerve of some people, black adjacent hiders. They have the nerve talking about black Americans and don't know a damn thing about true black American history. The beginnings of the coup can be traced to a summer of 1898. Self-declared white supremacists. Let me stop right here for a second. I despise the way this word is being used now, because now it's almost like it's been diluted down. It's, you know, it's the insult when you have certain numbers of ones within certain parts of predominant culture, well-to-do off, talking about white supremacy. About a generation ago, you didn't hear a lot of Anglos talking about white supremacy. As what? So a generation is about 25 years. Well, black America is still going through racial racism, hatred of black pain a generation ago. But you didn't hear no words of white supremacy like that because it wasn't cool to talk about. Many numbers of Anglos didn't even hear about that word. Now it's cool to talk about it, to say white supremacy, to make them look hip. Even you got some nervous, some black Jason Hodders, when they get a little remindment a little bit, because they thought they were so different. Oh, yo, I've done some shows on that. And how many of them say white supremacists are you some border break illegal immigrants? The nerve of them, and by the way, knowing damn well black Americans better not go to across that border or go to some other country and break immigration laws instead of be setting fireness upon police cars, sitting there blocking traffic, going to their government buildings in front, protesting, and not being a citizen. The nerve. You know that won't happen at all. Right? And how many of them are talking about white supremacy? And some other people who know they're talking about white supremacy. The nerve. Right? See, when black people start talking, black Americans start bringing up certain things, you got other people who won't jump on board. You start talking about people, black Americans start talking about Karens. I don't use the word Karen whatsoever. There are numbers of black women named Karens. Right? But again, somebody said Lakeisha, Tanya. Oh, you best believe some people be pissed off. Oh my goodness, why you gotta be racist about that? Right? I don't use Karen. And I understand, well, anyway, the understandable, they try to use a certain terminology, but I'm not gonna use the word Karen. Not gonna do it. I'll make sure it's individualized the person, the violent Anglo male, violent Anglo woman. Right? And put that in perspective as well, that there's still a emergency of epidemic of white on white criminality, white on white fatigue, right? I make this point. Let me go back. The usage of white supremacists is getting tiring because, again, too many people are starting to use that word to sit there as a cool point. Again, it's like you hear numbers of Anglos using the word Karen now. You start being a Karen. But how many of them have anti-American black hatred, but they walk around talking about Karens? You see how this goes. Black Americans are the most uniqueness of any culture in America, in creativity, achievements, etc. Black Americans' music travel around this globe. Nobody else's music go across this globe like Black Americans. Rock and roll, funk, soul, R&B, jazz, tenets of country. By the way, country is nothing but an off brandness of soul, a type of funk, a type of blues, should we say. And it was just turned around a little bit and then made it Angloized. That's all country is. And you hear certain types of them rapping. You said it goes. So they Angloized country music. And you still have the tenets of country music, again, coming from Black Americans. Right? And you got people sitting there trying to copy hip-hop, as if hip-hop is only about gangsterism. Please. You had many parts of constructive hip-hop in the 70s and 80s, right? But the people don't want to talk about that. They don't want to look at gangsta music. You see how that game goes, right? And unfortunately, there's not enough Black Americans as well to educate some people about, hey, look, you can play hip hop all you want, but we're not gonna sit there and just be listening or playing just the bad version of hip hop. No, we're gonna play some constructive hip hop, right? They got some nice beats as well in there. Hip hop is not just some gangsterism music, but it's interesting because you have some of those Anglos trying to copy that version. You got some Black adjacent ones trying to copy various types of R&B and funk and soul. I'm telling you, man. And unfortunately, that is default within sectional Americanism, who allow people to sit there and copy the creation of some of the greatest genres of music in America coming from Black Americans. Again, those are whole different topics in itself, right? The beginnings of the coup can be traced to the summer 1898. Self-declared white supremacists used the state's most influential newspaper, the News and Observer, published by Josephus Daniels, to gin up panic over Negro rule, not African rule, not Caribbean rule, right? It's about like Black Americans, please, people. With inflammatory headlines and racist cartoons depicting Black American people as buffoonish, incompetent when they weren't chasing down and robbing white women. Does this not still sound like something today that's still being used, even by certain women from certain parts of the system of chaos? Look at the Black American men. When they start getting up there, they start dating white women. So the hell what? A Black man's money is a Black male's choice. A Black man can date who the hell he wants. Just like you got people saying, you can't tell a woman what to do with her body. You can't tell a damn thing to a Black man who the hell they can date. And there's not enough Black American men to tell these Sister of Chaos type people and whoever else, go to hell. See, sometimes quietness is beneficial and sometimes quietness is not. Because the Sister of Chaos can date who the hell they want. Oh, we don't want to go into the numerous type of Black American women and some numbers of Black adjacent women that are sitting there dating and married numbers of Anglo males. And no, 99% of people ain't saying a damn thing about that. I'm talking Sister of Chaos. They not saying anything about that. And numbers of Black American males like, don't care about talking about whoever the Sister of Chaos talk, who cares? But the opposite, when Black American males talk to Anglo women or some other women, you got people got a problem with that. The nerve. The damn nerve. Where there is not enough religion in the pulpit to organize a crusade against sin, nor justice in the courthouse to promptly punish crime, nor manhood. See that? Nor manhood enough in the nation to put a sheltering arm. I know it's all rhetoric in that about innocence and virtue. That's all mobble feminist talk. She said, "What? Hold on, let me back up. No, it's okay. I'm going to that. If it needs lynching to protect women's dearest possession from ravening human beasts, then I say lynch 1,000 times a week if necessary." Damn. Right? And basically this was I think it was an Anglo woman that talked like this. Actually, some of it, but this was an Anglo male that said some of this part. But same time, it's also the Anglo woman that was talking some mad anti-American Black hatred as well. But let me read that last part again. This last part. If it needs lynching to protect women's dearest possession from ravening human beings, then I say lynch 1,000 times a week if necessary. My goodness, toward Black American males. My goodness. Well, that hatred. White supremacist newspapers, which again, I don't like utilize that word without context. Because again, the nerve, because there are some Anglo people that are the ones it applies to, say one's lecturing and has some decent jobs or whatever it is, or whatever it might be, conversations they'll utilize, well, no, white supremacists. And how many of them go back to well-to-do gated community houses, but out of their damn mouths talking about white supremacists? They don't know what the hell they talking about. They just regurgitate parakeet to my white supremacists. Don't know what the hell they talking about. You got some white supremacists thinking piss poor numbers of Anglos. They have white supremacist mentality. That is not up there. Because true white supremacy, or should I say true supremacist people, you won't see a lot of them. There's a few some people that know, that talk. Oh, there's definitely some, but there are quite a number of ones behind the veil who you'll never see. That's what makes them true supremacists. So white supremacist newspapers reprinted the speech and Alex Manley, the editor and publisher of the Daily Record, Wilmington's black newspaper, had the temerity to respond that indeed the white men who had been robbing black women, repeat this again, the numbers of white men who have been robbing black women since the country was founded had not been held to account. Where's all that sister of chaos hatred on that part? Nope. Right? His editorial was reprinted throughout the South, further enraging the white elite and threats against Manley's life poured in. Ain't that how it's still going right now? White rage? The one applies to. Because very small amount of people within Angloism, they might not act like a collective, but those are very small. Because in this country of America, if it was collective Angloism that was about being for Black Americans and justice for Black Americans, there's no way in hell that hundreds of years and centuries in the country of America, it could have been so racism haterized toward Black Americans if there was a majority of Anglos who were about making sure to do the right thing for Black Americans. I'm just saying that's reality talk. And that goes today in 2025. Wilmington's white business leaders, aided by the News and Observer, amped up their supremacist campaign. What did I say? Wilmington's white business leaders, aided by the News and Observer, amped up their white supremacist campaign. They hoarded boom boom pieces of equipment and cheered barn-burning calls to action. They invited help from the South Carolina racial racists, the so-called red shirts, white men who would yank Black men out of their homes, beat them, and threaten to unalive them if they tried to vote. Let me repeat this. Wilmington's white business leaders, the ones applies to, aided by the News and Observer, amped up their white supremacist campaign and regular piss-poor Anglo anti-American Black racial racism campaign, and even some mid-level numbers of Anglos that had their King Kong super hatred, not King Kong himself, but they had a gigantic size, King Kong size, anti-American Black hatred as well, campaign as well. They hoarded boom boom pieces of equipment, cheered barn-burning calls to action. They invited help from South Carolina racial racists, Anglo ones, the so-called red shirt, white men who would yank Black men, not yank African men, not yank Caribbean men, not yank Native American men, not yank white Hispanic men, not yank white numbers of Asian men, because there are numbers of Asians that try to act like they're Anglo. The ones applies to. So we're not going to play no games of sidestepping that. Because what about the Afro Asians? What about the Afro Spanish that I talk about? Huh? So we're not going to play that tactic. So they would yank Black American men out of their homes, beat them, and threaten to unalive them if they tried to vote. But Black people are lazy. Black American men are lazy. Black American men I was talking about, Black folks I was talking about racism. You can go to hell. On November the 7th, at the county courthouse, 1898, Confederate Civil War veteran Alfred Moore Watto gave an incendiary speech. Men, Anglo men, the crisis is upon us. You must do your duty. This city, county, and state shall be rid of Negro. Did he say African? And by the way, regardless, they would have meant Black Americans. Of Negro domination once and forever. But Black Americans always talk about racism, right? Still going on 1898, still going on 2025. You are the sons of noble ancestry. That fled too, by the way. Numbers of them fled from various parts of Europe, by the way. How many of them came over on ships, unsanitariness themselves, the ones applies to, were put in super roach-infested places in certain other places. How many came over in those potato famines? I mean, just this yuckiness, unsanitary, but personnel comes from noble ancestry. All right. You are Anglo-Saxons. Go to the popes, and they try to confuse some part of Anglo-Saxons as if they are descendants of Anglo-Saxons collectively. And when they mean Anglo-Saxons, they talking about, oh, look at the warriness of the strong Anglo-Saxons. That still would have been a very small percentage. And Anglo-Saxons, when they talking about certain war and conflicts, were not coming from certain parts of Europe like that, by the way. On the Mayflower, there were no Anglo-Saxons of some super gigantic ancestry on the Mayflower as well. No such thing. Going to James, anyway, on a Plymouth, on a place like that, there was no super, oh my goodness, great Anglo-Saxons going across in those places, going from the Atlantic Ocean. I don't know, I think I said Pacific before, maybe not. They weren't coming across from various parts of England, London, as great Anglo-Saxons. No, many were fleeing from political persecution by people that looked like them. And number of them was criminality, people that got on those ships as well, or they won't talk about that. Go to the polls tomorrow, and if you find a Negro out voting, tell him to leave the polls, and if he refuses, unalive him. Shoot him down in his tracks. On election day, armed white men, red shirts, stalked the streets of Wilmington and intimidated Black men from voting in Black precincts basic election. Many people have not heard about that still. And this is why those of Black Americans better come together and stop allowing people to tell them to forget history. Because again, you better not sit there and tell people to forget about this poster board of hatred by a certain number of people. You better not do that. But the minute you start talking about again, what are you going to do about Black American justice? What are you going to do about that?
Nothing. I know nothing. I know nothing.
Right. And actually, I have one more. Actually, I'm going to show this. This is another article similar to that. And I'm just going to probably read this a little bit quicker. And I'm probably going to go ahead and call this a day. on this. It's also another article relating to this right here. This Wilmington is such an extreme importance because many people still have not heard about this because in various parts of the educational system that's not ran by none of the Black Americans. It's ran by certain ones within certain parts of economic culture, and they're not going to tell the reality of history. And again, I'm not talking about the small number within Angloism teachers that are not acting like a collective that will tell the truth. And there have been some Anglos that try to tell the truth, and they've lost jobs and been rolled up and all that kind of stuff, right? So I'm just going to read us a piece of this. Again, 1898, Wilmington, North Carolina coup. What traditionally has been termed a race riot has also been called a massacre, rebellion, revolt, race war, and coup d'etat. The events of November 10, 1898 in Wilmington, North Carolina, constitute a landmark in North Carolina history. Over a century later, some details are still in question. The numbers of casualties, for example, range from coroners 14 to unconfirmed reports of scores of even numbers of unalive. The 2006 official state report settled upon as many as 60. All of the reported victims were Black. This last thing I want to show in this part, I think is oh yeah, here we go. I think history, no, not that right there. Understanding impact. Where'd it go? That's a video I was going to play, but I'm not going to do that. You know, should I do that? What's this? The events of November 10th, 1898 in Wilmington were a turning point in North Carolina's history. By force, a white mob seized the reins of government in the port city, and in so doing, destroyed the local Black-owned newspaper office and terrorized the Black American community, because I'm not going to say African American. That was maybe useful for a certain section of time, but as I've said on podcasts before, you can have some certain type of Chinese personnel. I'm giving an example. Or certain types of Indian personnel. I'm giving an example that got away from those places, went to Africa. Say ones that had a baby or babies, let's say there's a health situation where they couldn't. That baby or baby that's produced out of whatever sections of Africa, that baby is now African. They come over to America, now they're African American. So I'm not playing that game. African American was okay at the time, but now that's been diluted. So now that's why I say Black American. In the months thereafter, political upheaval resulted across the state, North Carolina, and legal restrictions were placed on the rights of Blacks, of Black Americans, not Black adjacent, not Black adjacent, hotter tethers, right? Black Americans to vote. The era of Jim Crow, one of the legal segregation, not to end until the 1960s. But people are gonna try to tell Black Americans to get over the past, and still of the effects of that still carried over until generations later. And again, when you bring up what are you gonna do about for Black Americans earned for justice, what are you gonna do about that?
Nothing. Nothing. I know nothing. Nothing.
But white on white crime is an epidemic that needs to be fixed. It should be considered a national crisis. And let's hear it one last time from the great Deputy Barney Fife from the great Andy Griffin Show. What you would be doing about this white on white criminality and this white on white fatigue. What should we be doing about this?
I say this calls for action, and now, nip it in the bud.
What? Say that again. What should we do about that?
I say this calls for action, and now, nip it in the bud.
Last thing I want to show you was from the 1940s, which was less than 100 years ago. Let me say this again. The last thing I'm about to show you, which is very important, that happened in this particular pseudo-presidential election that was about to happen. And these personnel were wanting to elect to branch off on certain Democrats to branch off. And one of the leaders that they wanted to try to get was a South Carolina governor who was a super segregationist, extremely anti-American Black. This was going on less than 100 years ago. So it is outright blatantly disrespectful to millions of American Blacks, and especially American Black ancestors, when certain numbers of American Blacks are allowing people to dictate Black American history in America. Since for without Black Americans, many type of Black adjacent holders and runners wouldn't even be allowed to come in America.
Walked out of the Democratic Convention, formed delegates who walked out of the Democratic Convention formed their own party.
The Southern revolt against President Truman reaches its climax at Birmingham under the states' rights banner.
The so-called Dixiecrats nominated the South Carolina Governor Strom Thurmond as their presidential candidate. The South Carolina Governor Strom Thurmond. The so-called Dixiecrats nominated the South Carolina Governor Strom Thurmond as their presidential candidate.
There's not enough troops in the army to force the Southern people to break down segregation and admit the Negroes into our theaters, into our swimming pools, into our homes, and into our churches.
But Black Americans are told to forget about history. But you better not tell certain type people forget about this guy right here. That 1945, when the war ended in World War II, in 1945, what did I sit there to show you?
Delegates who walked out of the Democratic Convention formed their own party.
The Southern revolt against President Truman reaches its climax at Birmingham under the states' rights banner.
The so-called Dixiecrats nominated the South Carolina Governor Strom Thurmond as their presidential candidate.
There's not enough troops in the army to force the Southern people to break down segregation and admit the Negroes into our theaters, into our swimming pools, into our homes, and into our churches.
That happened after 1945 in America. What I just showed you. That happened after the bad Hitler man, when he was supposed to be wink, wink, unalived in Germany. But you didn't see no kind of bodies, no kind of pictures or anything like that. Wink, wink. But again, Black Americans are told, forget about history. But again, you better not tell the people that will remind you in this situation to forget about history. But again, we start talking about like the Wilmington, North Carolina, 1898, anti-American Black hatred, racial racism massacre of Black folks. You're supposed to get over the past. They tell American Black folks to get over the past. But they better not tell what we call Native Indians, whatever that's supposed to be, Native American Indians, to forget about numbers of their past. But again, we talk about Black Americans' history of racial racism, anti-American Black hatred, and racial racism toward American Blacks. This is what you have certain ones within the predominant culture do. And you got some ones within Black adjacent fleers and hotters who want to be like certain ones within certain parts of predominant culture. This is what they do.
I know nothing. Nothing. I know nothing.
Yes, that is what quite a number of people within certain parts of Angloism do. We start talking about history within America and the racial racism hatred that's been going on toward Black Americans for centuries of Black pain. I thank you for tuning in to the Real CP show. Definitely wasn't no upbeat music on that part.